Some people don't like moving. Can you hear now? So I guess that is different for some people. We're further away from and this may not be permanent, but here we are tonight. Be in Numbers chapter 14. Since we finished Numbers 14, since we finished with Ecclesiastes, we've spent some time looking at Bible characters and spent some time with the elders, and so I'm going to look again. I don't know how long I might do this. But look again at looking at a Bible character, and that being Caleb. There in Numbers chapter 14, verse 24 says, "But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit in him and has followed me fully, I will bring him into the land where he went, and his descendants shall inherit it." Caleb is not one of the best known characters in Scripture, but he's not one of the lesser known either. A very familiar story in the Bible that we remember was that of the 12 spies of Israel being sent out into the land of Canaan. Chapter 13, verse 1, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them." And they picked those 12 spies, and they went out into the land, and they spent 40 days traversing, spying out, looking into what was there and who was there. And they brought back both good news and bad news. It was a land flowing with milk and honey, and it was I was going to look at verse 27 back in chapter 13. "We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." And so there's an example that they could judge the land by its fruit, much like things are judged by the fruit today. They go on to report, verse 28 of chapter 13, that it was a land occupied by strong people and by giants. In verse 30, Caleb seeks to reassure the people. Yet, as we know, the 10 spies overwhelmed the people of Israel with their bad report. And only Joshua and Caleb were the two spies that had confidence in the Lord, but yet the people heeded the bad report and the report of the 10 spies. And so this brought on God's condemnation. And because of that, the Israelites were going to spend 10 years or 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, according to chapter 14, verses 29 through 34. We find in verses 36 and 37 of chapter 14 that the 10 spies died by a plague, and then only Joshua and Caleb were spared. Verse 38, but Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh remained alive of the men who went to spy out the land. Why was Caleb spared? And I think that is found in what we have mentioned in verse 24 there of chapter 14. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit in him and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land where he went, and his descendants shall inherit it. He followed me fully. That statement is made about Caleb in other places, or a similar statement is made in chapter 32 of Numbers, verses 11 and 12. Deuteronomy chapter 1 and verse 36, Joshua chapter 14 verses 8 and 9. So there are other places that refers to Caleb and his life, his commitment, his action of following the Lord fully, or wholly, W-H-O-L-L-Y, not H-O-L-Y, but W-H-O-L-L-Y, holy. A lot of the translations use that word rather than fully, that he followed the Lord wholly. What an epitaph. I've mentioned to you sometimes, and which I've probably not going to have a tombstone. Last time we flew somewhere, went on a trip, I left information for the kids in case something were to happen to us. I said, cheapest thing would be to cremate us. I don't care then, you can flush us. So they'll probably take me up on that. So I probably won't have a tombstone, but I like to think about epitaphs and what would be said or what would be appropriate. I like this thought. He followed the Lord wholly. W-H-O-L-L-Y. Or he followed the Lord fully. Whether I have a tombstone or not, I hope that it can be said about me. And I hope that it can be said about you, that you followed the Lord wholly. So, what does it mean to follow the Lord fully or wholly as Caleb did? That's really what we're here to find out tonight. We look at these Old Testament characters, we can regurgitate some of their stories, and Caleb is one of those stories that at least we can regurgitate a little bit about Caleb, and he was one of the spies. What does that mean to us? What can we learn from that? What can we take from Caleb and apply to our lives? We're not going to be spies. We're not going to be sent out to look at the land. We're not going to be mixed in with 11 other people to bring back a report. So what can we learn from Caleb? I'm interested to know what the Lord was talking about, or what might the Lord have been talking about when he said, Caleb followed me wholly, fully. He was what? Okay, he was loyal. What else? Hold on just a second. Okay, Gary said, like many of the others, he trusted God, everything that he said. Johnny. Okay, fully, like overflowing. We have that example, one of the most well-known scriptures in the Bible, my cup overflows. Okay. What else? What do you think? So there can't be a wrong answer when I say, what do you think? Okay, they were willing to stand up against the majority.
And they saw the same thing the other, the 10 that gave the bad report.
Yeah, that's an interesting statement. Gary says they all saw the same thing. What was the difference?
Trust in God.
Trust in God? I think they had different eyes. I think they were looking through different eyes. And it has to do with exactly what Gary said. You know, some of their, was it Solomon? I think it was. Was it Solomon that said, I've made a covenant with my eyes? Think about that. And I've never really thought about this before, but Gary said it, and it's true. They all saw the same thing. But what was the difference? The difference was what they were looking through. And what determined what they were looking through? What? All right, their heart, their preparation, their faith in God.
This was the promised land. God promised it to them. Caleb took that promise quite literally and trusted that he would make sure it took place.
Okay. Caleb trusted in what God had said. This is what he had promised. Did Caleb know how it was going to work out? No. Now, to Abraham, right. And we could say in some ways they didn't know, but in other ways they did know. They knew it was going to work out, but they didn't know how it was going to work out. That's a great lesson. As simple as it may sound, that's a very great lesson for us still today. Things are going to work out. We don't know how they're going to work out. It was in 2016 that started getting word that I may not have the job that I'd had for some 30 years. And as it turned out in last day of April 2017, I didn't have the job that I'd had for 32 years plus. Jan and I talked about it, and we said, it's time to practice what we preach. Said for all these years, God's going to provide. God's going to take care of us. Things are going to be okay. Does that mean I could sit back and do nothing? No. Man, I had the foresight one night at a ball game in the fall of 2016. Saw Clark Hall walking around the fence, going over to Westbrook side. His kids were playing at Glencoe. I was carrying the sticks, and I was on the sideline getting ready for the ball game. Here comes Clark walking around. I said, "Hey, Clark, how you doing?" He said, "Good." We struck up a conversation. I said, "Hey, I may be calling you in a few months. I may be losing my job." He kind of laughed and said, "All right, give me a call." The rest, as they say, is history. Okay, how long has it been since April 2017? 6 years almost, right? My math right? Is that 6 years? Lord took care of us, blessed us, greatly blessed. Not because of what I did, other than having some knowledge and using some knowledge that God had allowed me to have. I'm not saying I was like Caleb, but we had a faith. We didn't know what was going to happen. But just like we mentioned earlier, I kind of knew what the end of the story was going to be. I didn't know how I was going to I didn't know what path I was going to have to take to get there. Any other comments before we move on about what does it mean? Follow fully. Okay. Okay. All right. Interesting that what David says, it falls right in line with what Gary said, because the 10 spies all saw the same thing when they went into the land. But David points out, before they went into the land, they had also seen the same things. They had seen what God had done. Yet the 10, we can say, rejected what they had witnessed. They let their physical, personal inadequacies overrule their faith in God. So not only did they see the same thing in the land, they had always seen the same things. How God brought them out, how God parted the seas, how God gave them manna, how God, and on we could go. But yet, Caleb followed the Lord fully. We've got to we're in the same boat, as the saying goes, as the 12 spies were. We've got a decision to make. You know, Joshua tells them in a few days, you got to make a decision. But as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. And that's where we're at. As we think about what does this mean to me. Let's spend a little bit of time looking at maybe what it meant to follow the Lord wholly. Without question, okay? Certainly that would be a part of it. Here's some thoughts to go along with what we've already talked about. Follow the Lord wholly means to follow him all of our days. That appears to be the case with Caleb. He followed the Lord in the wilderness. 45 years later, he followed the Lord in the land of Canaan. We have examples, countless examples of those that did not follow all of their days. We talked about Lot's wife, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks ago now, but like Lot's wife, many turned their back. Figuratively and even literally sometimes, and they stopped following the Lord. Galatians chapter 3 and verse 1 refers to those in Galatia that were bewitched. They were confounded. They allowed things to get in the way of what was important. They were majoring on minors rather than on the important things. And that keeps many from following the Lord fully and following him all of their days. And that's what we've talked about. You remember me asking the question, why did Abraham do what Abraham did? And we say, well, because God said so. Well, then my next question is, well, why did he do what God said? So we got to develop that. And one, there's a trust. A trust in what? A trust that God's going to do what he says. A trust that God's going to keep his part of the bargain. Somebody over here started to say, Barney. Okay, we're told that in the New Testament we're to follow by faith and not by sight. In Hebrews, it gives us the definition of faith: the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. There's another verse we can regurgitate. What does it mean? It means there's something to it. There's substance and there's evidence. Even though it's things hoped for and things not seen, there's something to it. And where does the substance, by the way, that's what, Hebrews 11:6. Where does the substance come from? Where does the evidence come from? It comes in our relationship with God. That's what allows us to do what Caleb did rather than what the 10 did. Caleb had seen the evidence. Caleb realized that there was substance to all that God had done. Was Caleb stupid when he saw the giants? No. I'm sure he scratched his head. And he said, well, if it's up to me, I don't know about this. But then he realized it wasn't up to him because of the evidence and the substance. So he was one that followed Jesus all of his days. I think another thing that would play into this word holy or fully or completely would be following with all of our heart. It's one thing to follow all of our days, but it's really another thing to follow with all of our heart. Now, if we follow with all of our heart for all of our days, now we're getting somewhere. And now that faith is going to make a difference. And I believe Caleb followed with all of his heart.
You see what happened to those 10 spies that did not follow God.
Yeah.
They died of
Yep. They met their demise with,
that should tell us something today.
right. One thing it tells me is I continue to be thankful that God doesn't deal with us today like he dealt with them back there. Yeah, but there's what you got to think about, isn't it? You know, we don't have to face the physical stuff here on this earth and think that God's going to strike us dead for doing something like what the 10 spies did. But we can't lose sight that, and people, man, this isn't really politically correct, so don't tell anybody I said this, but really God's still going to strike us dead. When, Donald? You said it. The day of judgment. See. Yes, sir.
God's not going to ask a Christian to do something that he's not capable of doing. And yet we look at these examples, Abraham, Caleb, you know, they had to have that right relationship and belief in God to do it. I mean, you couldn't just throw, well, just like the spies, you know, they rejected it. But what I'm saying is, he is not going to ask us to do something that we're not capable of doing.
Johnny says he's not going to ask us to do something we're not capable of doing. Is it possible to follow God wholly? Fully?
We shoot for a mark, we've got a mark that we shoot for, and we don't ever hit that mark when we're trying for it.
And I answer that question by saying, you know, if I thought it wasn't possible for us to follow the Lord wholly, I wouldn't be standing up here talking about it. Because that's what I said to start with. How does this apply to me? How does this apply to us? What can we do? And I believe with all of my heart that everybody in this room can follow God wholly with all of our heart for all of our days. Solomon, at times he had a divided heart. He was influenced by his foreign wives. 1 Kings chapter 11 and verse 4. We have those that James was talking about in the book of James, seeking to be friends with the world, James chapter 4 and verse 4. That's a big deal today, isn't it? That's a big struggle for Christians in being friends with the world.
In olden times, God spoke through the prophets. Today, He couldn't speak through His Son Jesus. We've got everything laid out for us, probably better than they have. It's all written down for our study. So there's really no excuse for us not to be following those guidelines and those principles and the demands and everything that is laid down in the Scripture.
It's interesting. I've been, my Bible reading this year has been taking place in my car. I'm listening to it. And just, this is the third week, I think, maybe. Maybe it's been three. Anyway, however long it's been. I started January the 3rd. I ride to work from my house downtown, maybe 18 minutes. I ride home. The wind current's about the same, so it takes me still about 18 minutes, okay? Whatever else running around, I do. I'm on like day 90 of Bible reading. That's almost a month in a week. So I'll be through with the Bible, and if I figure that right, if it keeps going, I'll be through in like 12 weeks, because that'd be 12 months, right? But I'm just saying, I never thought about it, never realized how quick I could. Now I do, in the app that I have, I've got it up at about 1 3/4 speed. Okay, so he's talking a little faster, but it doesn't sound like they're talking faster. So what might be a 15-minute reading takes about 9 minutes, maybe, something like that. But anyway, something to think about. Doesn't take long. But anyway, when it was going through Leviticus, and even some into Numbers, and just over and over, rather than saying, and I'll just use this as an example because he talks about this a lot. Rather than saying, don't sleep with another woman, he goes in and says, don't sleep with your brother's wife. Don't sleep with your stepfather's wife. And on, and I don't know for how long they talk about all the different women and then other things when it gets into the feast days. And even the tabernacle and how you do things and every little thing laid out. And I came home and I said to Jan, I said, man, I wonder why it just goes on and on and on and on. And she said, maybe so we can look at it and realize how much better we have it than they had it. In having to check every little mark. I'd forgotten there was such a thing as I've forgotten it now, a wind offering. Heard about all these others, but he talks about. But anyway, there's so many things in there. Go read Leviticus or listen to it. I would encourage you to listen to it. And just all of the stuff in there. It took a lot for them to do everything. We've got it, and I know you're not going to like this, and you're going to disagree, and you're going, well, I don't know about that. We got it easy. I believe what's said in Hebrews. It's a better covenant, what we have. It's better promises. It's a better priest. Everything, better sacrifice. everything is better. And that ought to mean something to us too. But they had the hazards. We've got to follow all of our days with all of our heart, despite the hazards. Think about Caleb. You think it was a hazard for him to look at those giants? Oh, yeah. But regardless of, we've already mentioned, what he thought, he wasn't going to let that get in the way. He was willing to face the wrath of his brethren. We've already mentioned that. Not just the other 10, but all the other people that sided with the other 10. Caleb had to deal with that. Joshua chapter 14, in his old age, I believe he was 85. And he said, I can still do it. I'll take that mountain. That's what he did. Despite the giants that were there, even in his old age. The 10 wanted to follow the Lord, but only when it was convenient. Only if there were no giants. Only if there were no hazards. They wanted to follow if everything was sunshine and roses. They didn't want the thorns. They didn't want the mud puddles. Had to be convenient. Yeah, Barney says it was given to them. They just wanted it gift wrapped, and that probably wouldn't mean enough either. Real quick, how are we enabled? What can we do to follow the Lord fully? Well, we can keep our eye on him. Somebody mentioned that early, more or less keeping our eye on the prize. What happens is when we lose focus, we take our eye off of the goal. That's when things start getting fuzzy. So we need to keep our eye on him, even when it's difficult, even when there's a lot of stuff going on around it. Keep your focus. And how do we do that, or what will help us do that? You remember one of the first things we read about Caleb? He had a different spirit. We probably should have spent more time tonight talking about that. But that's why, before the Lord said he followed him fully, he said he had a different spirit. And that's a way that we can follow the Lord fully. And we talked about it, but this is just re-emphasizing it. His spirit was different than the 10 other spies. We said earlier that their eyes were different. Why were their eyes different? Because his spirit was different. What he had inside was different. Now think about that. I wish I could tell you what it meant or what all was involved in the Spirit dwelling within us. I wish that some of you could explain, but we just can't. We just cannot comprehend. Well, we can have thoughts and we can have ideas, but Christians are to have a different spirit. And that spirit is to make a difference in their lives so that we can be useful and we can be fulfilled. So what do? I think we want to be like Caleb. follow the Lord fully or wholly. We need to keep our eye on him, and we need to take advantage of our different spirit that ought to allow us to make different decisions because we see things through different eyes. Thanks for being here, and thanks for your participation. Don't go nowhere. We'll be right back.
Good evening. Glad you've joined us this evening. We're going to sing 869, the first and fourth verse.
Come we that love the Lord and let Here in a moment, Hunter will lead us in that song, but I wanted to get back to kind of where we've been talking the past few Wednesday nights. I've been looking at the Sermon on the Mount backwards, actually. So we're going to be in Matthew chapter 7, and we're going to focus on verse 15. And it's actually one that we already know. It's a verse that we're very familiar with because even Paul talks about that. So we're going to dig into that here in just a moment. If you haven't grabbed a bulletin, before you leave tonight, grab a bulletin on the way out. Take note of all the announcements that are in there. There are a lot concerning some events of the congregation. Also, you'll notice on your bulletin, as you open it up, on that right side page, on that right column, on the right page, there's some information that you can fill out. Give us some names and addresses of those for our homecoming that's coming up. We're going to send them some letters, send them some reminders. They can come out and be with us. But grab a bulletin. You'll see all the information. And also wanted to alert you that Sandra Goins had eye surgery today and is at home recovering. She's going to be recovering for a few weeks. So continue to remember her in your prayers. But Matthew chapter 7 and verse 15, it says, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves." You know, when we hear that, sometimes we think of what Paul said. You know, Paul told the Ephesian elders, he said, you need to be careful because when I leave, wolves are going to enter this flock. And that was something that we think about every now and then, but we may not think about it normally. And what I mean by that is we know the verse, right? We know this, but Jesus is telling them in Matthew chapter 7, he's telling them that in a little bit of a different fashion. And the reason he's telling them that is because they're surrounded by Jewish teachers who are leading them down a wrong path. And he's reminding them, you have to beware of false teachers. You have to beware of false prophets, because when they come to you, they're going to come to you and they're going to look like everybody else. In 1942, in October of 1942, Merry Melodies, we know them as Looney Tunes, they released this particular cartoon. Now, they re-released it in March of 1950. At the time of its release, it was their 719th release. It was called The Sheepish Wolf. And you have, if you have kids that watch Looney Tunes or you watch Looney Tunes, you've seen this episode before. And what's very intriguing with this episode, it's very, very clear, right, that there is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Now, we see that and we go, all right, we got it. We got the idea. But what was very interesting about this cartoon when it was released is it used the exact same philosophies that the Bible teaches. That you've got to be careful. You've got to be on your guard because there's going to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. Now, here's how the cartoon went. In the cartoon, you had this kind of really, I don't know, it was a sheepdog, but it was really like a dopey sheepdog. Like it didn't pay attention. It really didn't think about everything that was going on. So what happens is this dopey sheepdog thinks, when he opens his eyes and he sees this wolf dressed as a sheep, he thinks it's a sheep. So what he does is he throws it into the sheep pen. Doesn't even examine it, just throws it into the sheep pen. Well, then it's in the sheep pen. Well, then one of the sheep, and I think the sheep either had the voice or said the word, it was like Rochester or Rochester or something like that. So the sheepdog figures out that there's a wolf in the flock. So what the sheepdog does, and only a way a cartoon could do it, is the sheepdog starts imitating the mating call of a wolf. Okay? The wolf comes out and gives the sheepdog a really big hug, kind of transformed, and comes out of the flock. Well, then what happens next is the dog figures out that that's the wolf. So the wolf runs and it hides. But what it does when it runs and it hides is it brings into it another fairy tale, or a fairy tale of Little Red Riding Hood. So the wolf dresses up like a Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother. If you know those nursery rhymes and those fables, you kind of start to draw a picture in your mind. Well, the dog comes in, catches it. The wolf runs out again, still in sheep's clothing, runs out into a hayfield. And eventually, the dog catches the wolf. And when it catches the wolf, it rips off the sheepskin. And right there, I mean, there's the picture. There's the still from the cartoon. And the dog is extremely happy. You can see the happiness on this sheepdog's face. He's finally figured out which one is the wolf, and he's got it. So he turns around to the entire flock of sheep. By the way, does anybody remember this cartoon? All right, he turns around to the entire flock of sheep. And if you don't, you can go watch it on YouTube. I did, and it's kind of interesting to watch again as an adult, knowing the background, knowing the history. But he turns around to the entire flock of sheep, and he says, look what I did. I figured out which one is the wolf. And the sheep look around, and the sheep take off their costumes, and they're all wolves. Now, right after that, there's a kind of the stun scene, the music kicks on, and you see the famous "That's all, folks." And you say to Chris, what does that have to do with Scripture? Well, here's what it has to do with Scripture. What does Jesus say? Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep clothing but are inwardly ravenous wolves. See, that sheepdog was not prepared. It wasn't paying attention to what was around it. And in fact, it didn't just let one wolf in. It let many wolves in. And at the end, when they thought that, hey, I got this one, everything's okay, turns around and every sheep in the pen was a wolf. What does the Bible say about evil in our lives? Evil is going to try to get us. The devil is going to try to bring us down. And sometimes we can get really accustomed to what we think is the right things, and we're doing what we think is the right things, and we're doing all that, but inwardly we throw one thing out and we forget everything else that's there. The sheepdog slowly let one wolf in after another, after another, after another. In the Sermon on the Mount, as Jesus has told them, and we're going to come back next Wednesday night and we're going to talk about verses 12 through 14, very, very familiar passage to us in chapter 7. But he's telling them this because he's saying, I just gave you good teaching. Beware that nobody takes that from you. Beware that nobody sneaks in and steals all the good stuff out of your life. It's a very simple cartoon. A simple cartoon based upon what we would say is a biblical concept of we've got to beware what we are allowing into our life. So I would encourage you this week, as you think about your life and as you go through the teachings of the Bible and as you listen to things and as you watch things and as you hear things and as you read things, ask yourself the question, what am I allowing in to my life? What am I allowing? Am I on guard, or am I kind of like that dopey sheepdog who just half paid attention and pretty soon lost the entire flock? Something to think about, something to put in your minds. But Hunter's picked an invitation song. If you're here and you're outside of Christ, you need prayers of the church, you need to respond to the gospel, to be baptized for remission of your sins, we want to do what we can to help you out this evening. So if you have the need to make a public response, why don't you do that while together we stand and as we sing.
Days are filled with sorrow and care, hearts are lonely and drear. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Jesus is very near. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. I will enter his gates with thanksgiving in my heart. I will enter his courts with praise. I will say this is the day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice, for he has made me glad. He has made me glad. He has made me glad.
Heavenly Father, we're thankful for this day that we have been allowed. We're also thankful for all the many blessings that has been given to us. We ask that you would be with those of our number that's having health issues and those that are recovering from surgeries, and be with them. Also, we ask that you'd be with our elders, help them with the decisions they make, be with the teachers and students in Josh and watch over them and keep them safe. And we ask that you'd grant us a day tomorrow and forgive us of any sin and wrong in our lives. We ask this in Christ's name.